as ideals upon which all citizens, South Africa will belong to all who live in it, that ultimately, whether you are black, white, Indian or colored, you can find your space and shared prosperity in this country. That is our mission. And it's a lifelong mission. It's a mission I'll give my life to.
Mmusi Maimane actually is redefining what 1994 actually should have represented. In this really powerful speech, he's actually throwing bullets on what the 1994 rainbow concept, the rainbow idea by Nelson Mandela, missed out. Let's listen to what he has to say about 1994, and I'll be back for some analysis.
I want to say this categorically. With due respect, 2024 is not our 1994. Now, 1994 was a particular period where parties organized themselves on racial identity. You had the Indian parties. I have the ballot paper from 1994 in my office. You had Indian parties, colored parties, white parties, black parties fighting an oppressive regime that is apartheid. If we hark back to that today, we are going to create again parties that are for black people, for white people, for Indian people, for colored people. That is not progressive. That is regressive. If you want a progressive future for South Africa, let's build new South African parties. Secondly, I hold the absolute view that centrists were disappeared. In 2019, you had many populist ideologies. In some ways, President Ramaphosa had come in this euphoric space. And we were starting to see society being polarized to the extreme left or to the extreme right. We've got to come back today and say and build a center. And that's what Build One South Africa is about. It's a centrist organization. It shares our values of a multiracial society. It has a policy framework that benefits from both public and private institutions. It charters a pathway where we say, where the majority of citizens in this country sit, they need to come into that. And we need to give birth to that. And it's a fight not only in South Africa, it's global. We're seeing populists rise everywhere who seek to win elections on the basis of even taking issues like immigration, but not talking about them sensibly. It's to create an enemy of the other so as to polarize society. And I think we've got to reclaim that centrist ground. We've got to build with South Africans there and ultimately be able to hold what is really expressed in our constitution in our country as ideals upon which all citizens, South Africa will belong to all who live in it. That ultimately, whether you are black, white, Indian or colored, you can find your space and shared prosperity in this country. That is our mission. And it's a lifelong mission. It's a mission I'll give my life to. And where I find parties that want to divide us and send us backwards, we have to reject that with everything in our must. Because if we do that, we will introduce a new form of apartheid without really calling it apartheid, but it will have similar effects of division and oppression of one race over another, or a dominance of one race over another.
Right, let's talk.
Yeah, so what do you guys think? I have a feeling, that somehow this message is directed to the EFF and Julius Malema, because I think I remember I once watched a speech by Julius Malema where he spoke about the fact that 2024 will be our 1994. And you see that statement needs to be unpacked, because it actually, for me, it actually promulgates several readings to ascribe 2024's election as the election that the 1994 election missed, so to speak. So in other words, when we think about what in some of the videos I've uploaded here, especially the one with Oliver Tambo's description of Nelson Mandela, what 1994 represented to those guys in the African National Congress at that time was a liberation movement. It was a move to liberate a certain group of people who were oppressed by what Julius Malema now describes a lot as monopoly capital. Okay, and these ANC Youth League members at the time, with Walter Sisulu, Oliver Tambo, and Nelson Mandela, really pushed hard and led a movement that really constantly fought against what they felt was an oppression against black people in South Africa by the apartheid regime, in power in South Africa. Okay. And so, in my understanding, you guys might have to correct me on this and leave comments. Let's talk about this. Let's debate about what 1994 represented and what it means when an electorate or someone speaks about the fact that 2024 would be our 1994. But this is my reading of 1994. It was a move by the ANC Youth League and the ANC in general to fight for the emancipation of the oppressed black South Africans, with the promise of a rainbow nation. And that was the struggle, because in shifting from a liberation movement to a would I say, a party that ought to cater for the culmination of all of the people that encapsulated that divide, that gave birth to oppression into a rainbow. I think that was where the struggle for the ANC was located. Okay, so the transition from a liberation movement to a rainbow movement. I think that I love the sound of that. The transition from a liberation movement to a rainbow movement then spelled, almost disaster for the ANC. Okay, and so this is what my reading of that statement is, that this is not. So when Mmusi Maimane speaks about the fact that 2024 is not 1994, this is what I hear him saying. So he's actually saying that the elections this year, by May the 29th, in actually a few days' time, is not the move to liberate oppressed black people, which the ANC in 1994 fought for. Okay, but 2024 now, um, in my reading of his statement, or his speech, 2024 now is the reality of what 1994 should have been. Okay, so it's a really tricky ideological play on words when these parties actually speak about or equate 2024 to 1994. One has to be really smart in understanding and listening to what these guys are saying, so that we can reach a clear understanding of what 2024 represented, or what 1994 represented, and what 2024 ought to represent. So rather than fighting to be another liberation movement, if at all any party wishes that 2024 should be the 1994, I think what 1994 ought to have represented was that push towards having a rainbow concept, bringing together all the different peoples that make this unique nation of South Africa, okay, which it missed, especially at the level of the ANC. And 2024 now should be an effort to achieve that missed opportunity, but not necessarily to to reclaim the values of the liberation from oppression, but rather the push towards building a rainbow consciousness that encapsulates and brings all of the peoples of South Africa together to building one solid body, where racial divides actually melt away and dissolve. But I know this would be a challenging move. This would be a challenging mission, because a lot of people are frustrated with the way things are going right now in South Africa. Whoever would arise as the leader to achieve the missed opportunity of 1994 would have to be really stern. I really believe that that person would have to be, really tough. Gaten Mackenzie almost looks like someone who has that level of toughness. And if probably Julius Malema spoke along the lines of achieving a rainbow nation, he would also be one of the tough. He would also exude one of the kind of rigid, astute leadership that would be able to push through the achievement of this rainbow consciousness. But I don't know how. I really, I'm still yet to study the leadership style of Mmusi Maimane, but he also sounds really promising in fighting for this, really political mannerism to which the rainbow concept should be achieved, because that's the way, that will be the goal. The goal to achieve the rainbow idea wouldn't be in a way that concentrates on one aspect of the moving parts of South Africa, but it will be one that has inept skill in politics, right? In trying to find ways of appeasing the multiple moving parts of South Africa, in finding a unifying compromise from each towards the greater good. Okay, and so this is what I think whoever would be the leader to grow and pursue this whole rainbow idea would have to exude. And I've seen a lot of your comments about Chris Pappas, in his speaking fluent isiZulu and having to speak about reigniting the rainbow consciousness, being a white South African. I think that's also a good promise. That's something that I would be also interested to see, especially coming from a young blood. But I've also seen a lot of your comments that have spoken about how Chris Pappas might also now be used or kind of like be representing the kind of experiment which Mmusi Maimane and the other blacks in the DA party have actually been used to try to test the waters and see what's possible to play around, especially now with Chris Pappas. It's about the use of language, okay, the linguistic mastery of isiZulu and how that can actually be used as a vehicle to garner some of the black votes, which probably the blacks in the DA previously weren't able to achieve. But I don't know. This is just me rambling. This is according to your comments I read on the videos in this channel. But what do you guys think about this speech by Mmusi Maimane here? That 1994 is not 2024. Share your thoughts. Share your thoughts in the comments.